Good morning. This video we're going to cover section 6.5, which is special factoring techniques. Now, as a recap, what we have been doing, we first factored out the GCF, and we're still going to have to do this first. Always look for your GCF and then take care of it. And then we ask ourselves if we have four terms. We're not going to have four terms here. We have this when we do factoring by grouping, which we also learned in the same section as the GCF. Since we don't have four terms, we're going to come down and look to see if we have two terms. Now, we are going to be dealing with this today, so we're going to be talking about a difference of squares. And if we don't, we're going to ask ourselves if we have three terms. Now, we know how to deal with those in general, okay? But today we are going to ask ourselves if we have perfect squares on the end. So we're finally going to understand what this is about. And then once we have this section done, we're going to know all the different ways of factoring that we're going to have in this class. Okay? So our formulas that we're going to have, these are ones that we have seen before. We have the difference of squares, which is a squared minus b squared. If you have something in this pattern, it will always factor as a plus b times a minus b. And then we have two versions of the perfect square trinomial. The first one has a plus in this position. The second one has one here. And it will factor as a plus b squared or a minus b squared. And it's always going to match that sign right there. We dealt with these in the last chapter. These were called special products. In the last chapter, we were given this side and we went to this side. We were given this side and went to here. Now we're going to start off on this side and go backwards. So in the last chapter, we were actually multiplying these out. Now we are factoring, which is essentially quote unquote unmultiplying. Okay? I told you in chapter 5 that even though you could always just distribute here, your life would be, your life would be much better if you learned to use the formula. And that will be a little bit more evident now. Okay, so our directions are always to factor completely. If we look at our factor tree, we're going to start off on this side. First thing is to look to see if we have a GCF. I have nothing that divides evenly into t squared and also into 16. So our answer to the GCF question is no. And then we ask ourselves if we have four terms. The answer is no. Do we have two terms? Yes. So we're going to check for a difference of squares. The way we check that is to ask ourselves, first of all, do we have a minus sign in the middle? Because if we don't have a minus sign, there's no way it is a difference of squares. If you have a plus sign there, there's not really anything we can do about it. And then you want to ask yourselves if these two things are perfect squares. T squared is obviously a perfect square. Its square root is t. I'm just going to mark that there. T squared, t times t is t squared. Okay? Then ask yourself if this is a perfect square. And this is 4 times 4. You are going to be expected to recognize certain perfect squares, and most of these you're going to remember very well. Let's see if I can remember which ones you see most often. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 6 squared 36, 7 squared is 49, 8 squared 64, 9 squared 81, 10 squared is 100, 11 squared is 121, 12 squared is 144, 13 squared is 169, 14 squared is 196, and 15 squared is 225. I think those are the ones we see most often. That does not mean that you can't have others, but those are the ones that they tend to choose a whole lot. Okay? If you are wondering how to tell whether or not something is a perfect square, What you want to look for is the square root button on your calculator. On this calculator, it is above, you look at the button directly beside the 7, and it is above that. So to use that, we're going to have to hit second, and then that button, and the square root's going to appear there. And if I hit 16, I should get 4, okay? If I tried to take the square root of something that is not a perfect square, on this kind of calculator, it's going to keep the square root in there usually. Okay, we're going to talk a whole lot more about this in a later chapter. If you're using a different kind of calculator, then you might get some big ugly decimal if it doesn't work. We're going to worry about how to switch back and forth on that in a later chapter. On the black calculator we had in the classroom, the square root button is in exactly the same position, and you use it the same way. Okay, so we have a perfect square here, and if you look at your formula, this says something squared minus something squared. Well, this is something squared. This right here is going to be the A position. This is our B. A squared, T squared is there. B squared, 4 squared is there, okay? And then that means we factor it. We have this side. You take your A plus your B times your A minus your B. Or you can do the minus one first, but this factors as A plus B, A minus B by the pattern. Now take these and plug it in. This will be T plus 4 times T minus 4. Or if you need to or want to, you can put the minus first. It is my own personal habit to put the plus first.